My beloved child, stay with me a little longer. Do not rush past these words, because what I am about to tell you may seem ordinary. Yet it has the power to change the direction of an entire life. Many people spend years asking God for a miracle, while quietly overlooking the miracles already placed in their hands. A gentle word, a patient heart, a listening ear, a faithful spirit. These gifts rarely make headlines, yet heaven treasures them more than the applause of crowds. Child, never believe that your value depends on how many people notice you. The stars never compete with one another. Each shines faithfully in the place where I have positioned it. Years ago, there lived a woman whose life appeared completely ordinary. She never stood on large stages. She never became famous. She never owned great wealth. Every morning she woke before sunrise. She knelt beside her bed, whispered a simple prayer. Lord, let someone leave my presence today feeling more loved than before. Then she quietly began another ordinary day. She greeted strangers with kindness. She remembered people's names. She wrote small notes of encouragement. She visited lonely neighbors. She prayed for people who never even knew her name. To the world, her life looked small. But heaven saw something different. Every act of compassion became a seed. Every quiet prayer became a light. Every unseen sacrifice became an offering of love. Child, the kingdom of God often grows in places the world forgets to look. One rainy afternoon, a young woman entered the small cafe where the older woman volunteered. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders were heavy. Her eyes carried the weight of silent battles. She ordered a cup of coffee, sat alone by the window, and quietly stared into the falling rain. Most people walked past without noticing her. But the older woman did. Not because she possessed extraordinary wisdom, but because years of walking with God had taught her to notice hurting hearts. She carried a warm cup of tea to the table, smiled gently, and asked only one question. My dear, how are you, really? For a long moment, the young woman said nothing. Then tears slowly filled her eyes. Because sometimes, the greatest gift we can offer another person is simply making them feel seen. Child, never underestimate the power of one sincere question asked with genuine love. That conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. No grand speeches. No complicated advice. Only compassion. Only patience. Only the quiet assurance that someone cared. When they finally stood to leave, the young woman whispered, "Thank you. You may never know this, but today I was ready to give up on my dreams. I thought no one would notice if I disappeared. But you reminded me that God still sees me." The older woman gently smiled. She squeezed the young woman's hand and softly replied, "My child, I did not save you today. God simply allowed me to remind you that you were never forgotten." As the young woman walked into the evening light, Hope returned to her heart. And the older woman quietly thanked God. Not because she had done something extraordinary, but because she had been available when heaven called. Child. Many of life's greatest miracles begin with someone who simply says, "I'm here," and chooses to love without expecting anything in return. My beloved child, God's message about the power of one ordinary life, Part 1. My beloved child. Come closer. Be still for just a little while. There is something I want your heart to hear today. Not because these words are extraordinary, but because they carry a truth that many people spend their entire lives searching for. The world is constantly telling you to become more successful, more admired, more powerful, more noticed. But heaven is asking a different question. Are you becoming more loving? Are you becoming more patient? Are you becoming more faithful? Because those are the things that last forever. Child. Never believe that a meaningful life begins on the day everyone finally notices you. A meaningful life begins the moment you decide to be faithful, even when no one is watching. Many people think they are waiting for their purpose. But purpose is rarely waiting somewhere in the future. Purpose is already hidden inside today's ordinary choices. The conversation you almost avoided. The person you almost ignored. The prayer you almost forgot to pray. The forgiveness you almost refused to give. These moments may seem small. Yet heaven sees every one of them. And nothing done in love is ever wasted. Years ago, there lived a man named Daniel. He lived in a quiet little town where very few exciting things ever happened. Every morning before sunrise, he woke to the gentle sound of birds outside his window. He would sit beside the old wooden table in his kitchen, open his worn Bible, and whisper the same simple prayer. Father, help me become the kind of man who brings peace wherever I go. It wasn't a long prayer. It wasn't filled with impressive words. But it was honest. And heaven always listens to honest hearts. Daniel worked as a maintenance worker at a local community center. No one considered his job important. He repaired broken chairs, painted old walls, fixed leaking pipes, swept dusty hallways after everyone else had gone home. Most people walked past him without saying a word. Some barely noticed he was there. Yet Daniel never complained. Because he believed something few people understood. Every task became worship when it was done with love. Child. Never allow the size of your assignment to determine the size of your faithfulness. One rainy Monday morning, Daniel arrived earlier than usual. The parking lot was almost empty. Dark clouds covered the sky. The wind gently carried fallen leaves across the sidewalk. As he unlocked the front door, he noticed an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench near the entrance. She held a small shopping bag close to her chest. Her clothes were clean, but worn with age. She looked tired. Not only in her body, but deep within her soul. Daniel smiled warmly. Good morning. She smiled politely. But her eyes remained heavy.
क्या?
He could have continued inside. After all,
अरे तू ना, हाँ मैं
he
जाऊंगा अभी.
had work waiting,
पहले वीडियो तो बना
schedules
लो
to
यार.
keep, repairs
हाँ?
to finish.
4
But something inside his heart quietly whispered,
वीडियो बना रहा हूँ ना, वीडियो भी मेरे को
"Sit
डालना
with
है
her."
यूट्यूब पे.
Child. The Holy Spirit often speaks in gentle
बता अब इनका.
whispers, not loud commands. Daniel placed his toolbox on the ground, sat beside the woman, and for several moments,
तब तक हम सोच
neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence is kinder than hurried conversation. Finally, the woman sighed softly. "I come here every Monday." Daniel looked at her with kindness. "I've never seen you before." She smiled sadly. "That's because people rarely notice older people anymore." Those words settled heavily in Daniel's heart. How many people had walked past her without seeing her? How many conversations had never happened because everyone was too busy? He quietly prayed inside his heart. "Father, help me listen." The woman continued. "My husband passed away 3 years ago. My children live far away. They love me. But they're busy. I understand." She looked toward the rain. "I suppose loneliness becomes part of growing old." Daniel didn't rush to give advice. He didn't search for the perfect words. Instead, he simply stayed. He listened. He nodded. And every few moments, he reminded her, "I'm glad you told me. Child." People often remember how you made them feel, long after they forget what you actually said. Nearly an hour passed. When the woman finally stood to leave, her smile looked different. It was no longer forced. She gently reached into her shopping bag, pulled out a small homemade loaf of bread wrapped carefully in cloth. "I baked this yesterday. I was hoping someone might enjoy it." Daniel accepted it with gratitude. "Thank you." Then she quietly said something he would never forget. "Today, for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible." Those simple words stayed with Daniel for the rest of the day. As he repaired broken furniture, he couldn't stop thinking about them. Invisible. How many people felt invisible every single day? The cashier no one thanked. The janitor everyone ignored. The elderly neighbor who waited all week hoping someone might knock on the door. The teenager quietly struggling behind a smile. The exhausted single parent carrying burdens no one could see. Child. Never underestimate the power of noticing the people everyone else overlooks. That evening, Daniel opened his journal. Instead of writing about the work he had completed, he wrote one sentence. "Today I repaired something no tool could ever fix. I reminded one person that she mattered." Then he closed the journal, looked toward heaven, and whispered, "Lord, if this is the work you have prepared for me, help me never become too busy to love people." As he turned off the kitchen light, he had no idea that one ordinary conversation on a rainy Monday would begin a chain of events that would quietly change hundreds of lives. But that story is only just beginning. My beloved child, stay with me. Because in the next chapter, a simple act of kindness will return years later in a way Daniel never imagined. And it will remind you that every seed planted in love is remembered by God, even when you think it has been forgotten. My beloved child, God's message about the power of one ordinary life, Part 2. My beloved child, stay with me. Do not leave too quickly. Because the greatest miracles are rarely recognized while they are happening. Most people expect miracles to arrive with thunder, with crowds, with unforgettable moments. But many of heaven's greatest works begin with something almost invisible. A gentle word, a patient heart, a door held open, a prayer whispered when no one else is listening. Never think that because something seems small, it is also insignificant. For I often hide eternal purposes inside ordinary moments. Child, remember this. Every act of love becomes a seed. And every seed planted in faith will produce fruit in its appointed season. The weeks quietly passed. Every Monday morning, Daniel returned to the same bench before beginning work. Sometimes the elderly woman was there. Sometimes she wasn't. When she came, they shared coffee. They laughed. They talked about memories, faith, family, and God's goodness. She told him stories about raising her children, about the struggles she and her husband had overcome, about prayers that had taken years to be answered. Daniel listened with genuine interest. He realized she wasn't simply an elderly woman. She carried decades of wisdom, lessons written not in books, but in tears, perseverance, and faith. Child, never ignore the wisdom of those who have walked with me for many years. One morning she smiled and asked, Daniel, do you know why I enjoy our conversations so much? He shook his head. She answered softly, because you listen to understand, not merely to reply. Daniel lowered his eyes. He knew that quality had not come naturally. Years earlier, he had interrupted people. He had hurried conversations. He had been distracted by schedules. But God had patiently changed his heart. Little by little. One ordinary day at a time. Child. Transformation rarely happens overnight. It happens through thousands of quiet moments of obedience. Several days later, the community center became unusually busy. Families filled every room. Children laughed in the hallways. Meetings continued from morning until evening. Daniel spent the entire day repairing broken tables and preparing rooms for upcoming events. Late that afternoon, as he carried a ladder through the hallway, he noticed a young employee sitting alone. Her name was Emily. Usually she greeted everyone with cheerful energy. Today, she stared silently at the floor. Daniel almost continued walking. After all, there were still many things waiting to be finished. But once again, that familiar whisper returned. Notice her. He gently placed the ladder against the wall. Walked over. and quietly asked, "Emily, is everything all right?" She forced a smile. "I'm fine." Daniel nodded kindly. Then replied, "You don't have to pretend with me." For several